Charlotte Monroe commanded every room she entered. Her sharp navy suit tailored perfectly to her athletic figure, her hair slicked back into a flawless chignon, and her calculated gait all exuded authority. At 42, she was the senator people loved to hate or hated to love, a power player who had crushed her opponents in debates and charmed constituents with her unwavering resolve. But as she glanced at her campaign manager's notes about the new strategist, Charlotte was skeptical. She hated taking advice from others, especially when it came to her campaign. Elena Reyes was nothing like Charlotte had imagined. She was barely 27, with a youthful energy that radiated from her every move. A pair of round glasses sat on her freckled nose, and her dark hair was tied loosely, leaving stray strands to frame her determined face. Her style was almost casual, jeans and a blazer that clashed with the formality of the room. "You're younger than I expected," Charlotte commented as she walked in. Her tone carried no warmth, just icy assessment. Elena straightened her spine. "And you're as intimidating as I was warned," she replied, her voice steady. The team froze. Silence filled the room as Charlotte's sharp blue eyes scanned the young woman, searching for weakness. But Elena's gaze remained unwavering, a defiant confidence glowing in her dark eyes. Charlotte smirked faintly, a rare expression. "Let's see if your ideas are as bold as your mouth," she said, gesturing for Elena to begin. Elena launched into her presentation with vigor. She moved around the room as she spoke, explaining her plans for grassroots outreach, digital campaigns targeting young voters, and the need to humanize Charlotte's image. Her voice was filled with conviction, every word backed by data and examples. By the time she finished, Charlotte leaned back in her chair, her arms crossed. "Your ideas are ambitious," she said, her tone measured. "But ambition without discipline can ruin campaigns." Elena met her gaze with a faint smirk. "Discipline without ambition doesn't win elections." The air seemed to thicken with tension. For the first time in years, Charlotte felt a spark of intrigue. Not just professionally, but personally. The younger woman's audacity was irritating, yes, but also refreshing. "Fine," Charlotte said, her voice softer now. "Let's see if you can turn all that ambition into results." The first month of working together was a battlefield. Elena's fresh, innovative ideas clashed with Charlotte's pragmatic approach. They fought over everything, from campaign slogans to press appearances. "Your plan risks alienating the base," Charlotte argued during one particularly heated meeting. "And your plan risks staying stuck in the past," Elena shot back, her voice steady, but tinged with frustration. Charlotte leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly on the table. "I've been in this game longer than you've been alive, Reyes. I know what works. And maybe it's time for you to learn something new," Elena retorted. The staff held their breath, expecting Charlotte to lash out. Instead, she chuckled dryly. "You're bold, I'll give you that," she said. Elena smiled slightly. Boldness wins elections. Despite their frequent clashes, there was a mutual respect growing between them. Late nights in the strategy room became common, their debates evolving into discussions that stretched into the early hours. During one such session, Elena hesitated before speaking. "You know, I didn't get into this field because of politics," she admitted, her voice softer now. Charlotte looked up from her notes, surprised. "Why, then?" "My mom was an activist," Elena said, a small smile playing on her lips. "She fought for immigrant rights, for people like her to have a voice. I guess I just wanted to continue her work in my own way." Charlotte studied her for a moment, her expression unreadable. "Your mother would be proud," she said quietly. The vulnerability in Charlotte's voice caught Elena off guard. For a moment, the senator wasn't the composed, authoritative figure she presented to the world. She was just a woman who understood the weight of responsibility. One late evening, the office was nearly empty. Charlotte and Elena sat across from each other, papers spread across the table as they reviewed the latest polling data. "We're closing the gap," Elena said, her excitement palpable. "If we push hard in these key districts." Charlotte interrupted her. "We can't just push hard. We need to push smart." Elena leaned over the table, her hand brushing against Charlotte's as she reached for a pen. The touch was brief, accidental, but it sent a jolt through both of them. Elena froze, her cheeks flushing. "Sorry," she murmured, pulling her hand back. Charlotte stared at her for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, almost imperceptibly, she reached out and placed her hand over Elena's. "Don't be," she said softly. Elena looked up, her breath hitching as their eyes met. The intensity in Charlotte's gaze was unlike anything she'd ever seen before. Before either of them could think twice, Charlotte leaned in, her lips brushing against Elena's in a tentative kiss. The kiss deepened, their inhibitions melting away as years of restraint gave way to raw emotion. When they finally pulled apart, both women were breathing heavily. "This is a mistake," Charlotte said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Then why does it feel so right?" Elena countered, her voice trembling. Charlotte didn't have an answer. Instead, she kissed Elena again, her hands tangling in the younger woman's hair. Charlotte prided herself on discipline. Her life was a symphony of order and control, each note carefully composed to project strength and authority. But Elena Reyes disrupted that balance. She had become a persistent melody that Charlotte couldn't silence, and it was both intoxicating and infuriating. The morning after their kiss, Charlotte sat in her office, staring at the sunlight spilling across her polished desk. Her phone buzzed with reminders for meetings, interviews, and calls, but all she could think about was Elena. The memory of her lips, soft and tentative, lingered like a secret she couldn't share. The door clicked open, breaking her reverie. Elena stepped in, a folder tucked under her arm, her glasses perched on her nose. She was as professional as ever, but her cheeks flushed slightly when their eyes met. "Morning, Senator," Elena said, her voice steady. Charlotte nodded, her expression carefully neutral. "Morning. What do you have for me?" Elena placed the folder on the desk, launching into a briefing about the latest polling data. Her tone was calm, confident, but Charlotte could see the subtle tension in her shoulders. She was trying hard to act normal, and Charlotte couldn't decide if that made her more endearing or maddening. When the briefing ended, Charlotte leaned back in her chair, studying Elena. "Is everything else in order?" Elena hesitated for the briefest moment. "Yes. The team is aligned on the next steps." "Good," Charlotte said, her tone curt. "That'll be all." Elena nodded and turned to leave, but at the door, she paused. "Charlotte." The use of her first name made Charlotte's heart skip. She looked up, her expression softening slightly. "I just want you to know," Elena said, her voice quiet, "that I'm here. Whatever this is, whatever happens, I'm not going anywhere." Charlotte's throat tightened, but she managed a nod. "Thank you, Reyes." That evening, the office emptied out early, leaving only the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant murmur of cleaning staff. Charlotte and Elena were the last ones there, as usual, their desks separated by a glass wall that seemed more symbolic than physical. Charlotte tapped away at her laptop, trying to focus on a speech draft, but her mind kept wandering. Finally, she pushed her chair back and walked to Elena's workspace. "Reyes," she said, leaning against the doorway. Elena looked up, startled. "Yes, Senators?" Charlotte smirked faintly. "Do you ever take a break? Or is that a concept you're unfamiliar with?" Elena chuckled, leaning back in her chair. "I could ask you the same thing." "Touché." An idea struck Charlotte, and before she could second-guess herself, she said, "Come with me. I need some air." Elena hesitated, then stood, grabbing her coat. "Lead the way." They walked out into the crisp night air, the city buzzing quietly around them. Charlotte led them to a small park a few blocks from the office, the kind of place she rarely visited but found herself drawn to now. They sat on a bench under a street lamp, the light casting soft shadows on Elena's face. "It's quiet here," Elena said, her voice breaking the silence. "Too quiet," Charlotte replied, a faint smile tugging at her lips. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the tension between them simmering just beneath the surface. Finally, Elena spoke. "Why did you get into politics?" Charlotte hesitated, caught off guard by the question. "Honestly, to make a difference." "As cliché as that sounds." "It doesn't sound cliché," Elena said. It sounds genuine. Charlotte glanced at her, surprised by the sincerity in her tone. And you? Why this field? Elena shrugged, a wistful smile crossing her face. I wanted to fight for people who didn't have a voice. My mom was an activist, and she always said that change starts with people who refuse to accept the status quo. She sounds remarkable, Charlotte said softly. She was, Elena replied. Their eyes met, and the world seemed to shrink around them. Before Charlotte could stop herself, she reached out, her hand brushing against Elena's. The younger woman didn't pull away. This is dangerous, Charlotte murmured. I know, Elena replied, her voice barely audible. And yet, Elena leaned in, her lips hovering just inches from Charlotte's. And yet, she echoed, closing the distance. The kiss was slow and deliberate, a melding of desire and hesitation. Charlotte's hands found their way to Elena's waist, pulling her closer as the world around them faded into irrelevance. When they finally broke apart, both women were breathless. We can't keep doing this, Charlotte said, though her hands remained on Elena's waist. Then stop me, Elena challenged, her eyes locked on Charlotte's. Charlotte didn't move. Instead, she kissed Elena again, her resolve crumbling under the weight of her emotions. Charlotte's world was built on the foundation of control. Every decision, every step, every carefully chosen word was calculated to perfection. But with Elena in her life, that foundation had begun to crack. The younger woman was a storm, passionate, relentless, and utterly captivating, and Charlotte was losing her ability to resist being swept away. It was late one night when the first real fracture appeared. The campaign office was dimly lit, the soft glow of computer screens the only light source. The hum of the HVAC system provided a soothing backdrop as Charlotte and Elena sat across from each other, poring over voter outreach data. This precinct is still a problem, Charlotte said, pointing to a spreadsheet on her laptop. We're underperforming with younger voters. Elena leaned over to look, her shoulder brushing against Charlotte's. The contact was brief but electric, sending a jolt through both women. We could try a town hall, Elena suggested. Something more informal. Show them you're approachable. Charlotte arched an eyebrow. Approachable? Me? Elena laughed softly. You're more approachable than you think, Charlotte. You just don't let people see it. There it was again, her name, spoken with a familiarity that felt both dangerous and thrilling. And what makes you think you've seen it? Charlotte challenged, her tone sharp but not unkind. Elena met her gaze, her expression softening. Because I have. You let me in, even if you don't realize it. Charlotte's breath hitched, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them. She wanted to say something, anything, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she turned back to her laptop, her fingers typing aimlessly. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken emotions. Finally, Elena broke it. Charlotte, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Charlotte looked up, her heart pounding. This thing between us, Elena continued, her eyes searching Charlotte's. What are we doing? Charlotte closed her laptop with a sigh, leaning back in her chair. I don't know, she admitted. Elena leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. I do. I know what I feel, Charlotte. And I think you do too. Charlotte's jaw tightened, her internal battle evident in her expression. Feelings don't matter in this world, Elena. Perception does. If anyone finds out, no one will, Elena interrupted. I would never do anything to hurt you. I know, Charlotte said, her voice softening. But this isn't just about you or me. It's about the campaign, my career, everything I've worked for. One mistake, and it could all come crashing down. Is that what you think this is? A mistake. Charlotte hesitated, the word hanging in the air like a loaded gun. No, she finally admitted. But it feels like one sometimes. Elena's expression softened, and she reached out, her hand covering Charlotte's. Then stop fighting it. Stop fighting me. Charlotte stared at their intertwined hands, her defenses crumbling. Slowly, she nodded, her voice barely audible. Okay. The next morning, Charlotte woke with a strange sense of peace. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel the constant pull of anxiety and self-doubt. Elena's presence in her life was disruptive, yes, but it was also grounding in a way she hadn't anticipated. In the office, their interactions were as professional as ever, but there was an undercurrent of intimacy that hadn't been there before. A lingering glance, a fleeting smile, a hand brushing against an arm. Each moment was charged with a quiet electricity that only they understood. But the cracks in Charlotte's armor were becoming more visible, and it was only a matter of time before someone noticed. Senator Monroe, her chief of staff, said one afternoon, stepping into her office. "A word." Charlotte looked up, her expression neutral. "What is it, Linda?" Linda closed the door behind her, her expression serious. "I've been hearing whispers. People are starting to talk." "About what?" Charlotte asked, though she already knew the answer. "About you and Reyes," Linda said bluntly. "The late nights, the closed-door meetings, the way you look at her. People are noticing, Charlotte." Charlotte's stomach tightened, but she kept her composure. "I don't know what you're talking about." Linda sighed, sitting down across from her. "I'm not here to judge you, Charlotte. But you need to be careful. The media will pounce on anything that looks even remotely scandalous, and this could ruin you." Charlotte nodded, her expression unreadable. "Thank you, Linda. I'll handle it." As Linda left, Charlotte leaned back in her chair, the weight of her words pressing down on her.
She knew Linda was right.
The cracks in her carefully constructed facade were growing wider, and it was only a matter of time before everything came tumbling down. The days blurred into nights, and the campaign trail became an endless whirlwind of speeches, town halls, and strategy meetings. Charlotte and Elena fell into a rhythm, one of quiet glances, stolen moments, and an intimacy that grew with each passing day. Yet, for all their closeness, there was an undercurrent of tension, an unspoken fear of what lay ahead. It was a rare evening when they both found themselves with a few hours to spare. Charlotte suggested they retreat to her townhouse, away from the prying eyes of the campaign office. Elena hesitated at first, but the exhaustion etched into Charlotte's face convinced her. The townhouse was modest but elegant, much like its owner. Elena stepped inside, taking in the warm tones of the decor and the personal touches, a stack of books on the coffee table, a framed photo of Charlotte with her late parents on the mantel. "This is nice," Elena said, her voice soft. Charlotte set her keys on the counter, her lips curving into a faint smile. "It's home. Or at least as close to home as I get these days." Elena followed her into the kitchen, where Charlotte poured them both glasses of wine. They sat at the small dining table, the city lights twinkling through the window behind them. "You know," Charlotte began, swirling her wine glass, "sometimes I wonder what it would be like to just walk away from all of this." Elena looked at her, surprised. "You? Walk away from politics?" Charlotte chuckled. "I know. It sounds absurd. But there are days when the weight of it all feels unbearable. The expectations, the scrutiny, the constant fight to prove myself." Her voice trailed off, and she took a sip of wine, her gaze distant. "I think you'd find a way to make a difference, no matter where you were," Elena said, her tone sincere. Charlotte looked at her, a hint of vulnerability in her eyes. "And what about you? Do you ever think about what comes next?" Elena hesitated, caught off guard by the question. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've always been so focused on the now, on what I can do in the moment to make an impact. I guess I haven't really thought about the future." Their eyes met, and the room seemed to grow quieter. "Maybe we should figure it out together," Charlotte said, her voice barely above a whisper. Elena's breath hitched, and she set her glass down, leaning forward. "Charlotte." Charlotte reached across the table, her fingers brushing against Elena's. The touch was gentle but deliberate, a silent promise that neither of them dared to put into words. They moved to the living room, the wine forgotten on the table. Charlotte sat on the couch, her legs tucked beneath her, while Elena sat beside her, their knees almost touching. "You know, when I first took this job, I didn't think I'd like you," Elena confessed, a teasing smile playing on her lips. Charlotte raised an eyebrow. "Oh, And why's that? Elena shrugged. You seemed so untouchable. Like you didn't need anyone. Charlotte laughed softly. I've spent my whole life building that image. It's easier to keep people at a distance when they think you're unapproachable. Well, you failed with me, Elena said, her smile widening. Charlotte's expression softened, and she reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind Elena's ear. I'm glad I did. The moment hung between them, charged with unspoken emotions. Slowly, Charlotte leaned in, her lips brushing against Elena's in a kiss that was both tender and passionate. Elena responded immediately, her hands sliding up to cup Charlotte's face as the kiss deepened. The world outside faded away, leaving only the warmth of their embrace. When they finally pulled apart, both women were breathless. This is dangerous, Charlotte murmured, her forehead resting against Elena's. I know, Elena replied, her voice steady. But it feels right. Charlotte smiled, her hand tracing a gentle path down Elena's arm. It does. They spent the rest of the evening talking, their words punctuated by kisses and quiet laughter. For the first time in a long time, Charlotte felt at peace, and she knew Elena was the reason why. The final stretch of the campaign was a blur. Charlotte had spent the past few weeks navigating a delicate balance between her career, her public image, and her relationship with Elena. They continued to work side by side, sharing the weight of every decision, every speech, every strategy, but beneath the professionalism, a quiet understanding grew between them. They weren't just colleagues anymore. They were something more, something far more complicated. As Election Day loomed on the horizon, so did the culmination of all their dreams and fears. Charlotte stood at the podium, delivering yet another rallying speech to a sea of supporters, her face glowing with confidence, her voice unwavering. She was the politician she'd always set out to be, but now there was something different about her. A quiet strength, a vulnerability that had been unlocked by Elena's presence in her life. Elena stood at the back of the room, watching Charlotte with a mixture of pride and apprehension. Over the past months, she'd come to know Charlotte not just as the ambitious politician who dominated every room, but as a woman who struggled with the same doubts and fears that Elena herself had faced. Charlotte had let her in, little by little, and Elena had come to appreciate the complexity beneath her hardened exterior. The rally ended, and Charlotte made her way backstage, where Elena was waiting for her as always. They didn't need words. The connection between them had grown too deep for mere conversation. Good job out there, Elena said softly, her eyes meeting Charlotte's with admiration. Charlotte gave her a tired but genuine smile, reaching out to touch Elena's arm. You're the one who got me here, she replied, her voice laden with emotion. I never could have done this without you. Elena shook her head, but the warmth in her smile said everything that words could not. You did all the work. I just helped you believe in yourself. For a moment, there was only silence between them. The quiet hum of the campaign office, the distant sound of cars honking outside, and the faint chatter from the staff. All of it faded into the background as their eyes locked in a shared understanding. You know, I never thought it would be like this, Charlotte murmured, her hand finding Elena's once again. I never thought I would care this much about anyone. Elena's heart skipped a beat. Charlotte, I'm not saying it in a bad way, Charlotte said quickly, squeezing Elena's hand. But I was so focused on what I wanted, on what I thought I needed, that I didn't realize how much I'd been missing. Until you came along. Elena felt the weight of those words settle deep in her chest, her emotions swirling in a mixture of hope and uncertainty. I'm not going anywhere, Charlotte, she said quietly, her voice filled with conviction. I'm with you, wherever this takes us. Charlotte's eyes softened. She took a step closer, her free hand reaching up to caress Elena's cheek. But what if this doesn't work? What if everything falls apart? Elena's gaze never wavered. Then we pick up the pieces together. We'll figure it out. For the first time in a long while, Charlotte allowed herself to be vulnerable. The weight of the campaign, the pressure of the impending election, the fear of losing everything, it all melted away in Elena's arms. I don't know what the future holds, Charlotte whispered. I don't know if we're supposed to be in each other's lives forever. But right now, I don't want to imagine my life without you. Elena's heart swelled with tenderness, and she gently cupped Charlotte's face in her hands. Neither do I, she murmured, leaning in to kiss her. The kiss was soft at first, a promise of something more. But as the seconds stretched into minutes, the kiss deepened, the tension between them finally giving way to the unspoken bond they'd built. It was a kiss that held everything: the longing, the uncertainty, the yearning, and the hope. It was the beginning of something, but also an acknowledgement that they had no idea what would come next. After a long while, they pulled apart, both of them breathless. Charlotte's forehead rested against Elena's, her eyes closed in a moment of quiet peace. Maybe we don't need to know what the future holds, Charlotte said, her voice low and steady. Maybe we just need to keep moving forward. Elena nodded, her thumb gently brushing Charlotte's lips. Together, Charlotte smiled, the weight of the world momentarily lifted from her shoulders. Together, the night of the election was a blur of emotions. The final results came in, and Charlotte had won. She had done it. It was a victory that brought cheers and applause, but Charlotte wasn't focused on the victory itself. She was focused on Elena, on the woman who had supported her every step of the way, on the woman whose presence had made this journey more than just about politics. As the campaign office erupted in celebration, Charlotte found herself standing in the center of the room, Elena by her side. The reporters, the cameras, the congratulations, they all felt like a distant memory. In that moment, there was only Elena. "Elena," Charlotte said softly, her voice thick with emotion. Elena looked up at her, her eyes full of warmth and something deeper, something that neither of them could name, but both of them understood. "I know this doesn't change everything," Charlotte continued, "but I want you to know something." "What is it?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Charlotte took a deep breath, steadying herself. "No matter what happens, no matter where this journey takes us, you are a part of my life. You've changed me, Elena. You've made me see things differently. And I'm not letting you go." Elena smiled, her heart full of tenderness. "You don't have to. I'm not going anywhere, Charlotte." They stood there for a long moment, the world around them fading into the background. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Charlotte felt ready to face it, as long as Elena was by her side. And in the quiet space between their hearts, they both knew this was just the beginning of something new, something uncertain, and something filled with infinite possibilities.